Welcome. Today we are going to be analyzing The Rings of Power. This is one we've been waiting to do for a while. You're going to get a take from two different filmmakers, two different perspectives. You can make up your own mind. I was disappointed overall. Let's put it that way. And it was interesting to see Game of Thrones, The House of the Dragon come out at the same time and to have those two juxtaposed. And watching those two side by side, I kept thinking, why does one resonate with me and why does one not? So with The Rings of Power, I think it falls into two categories, the aesthetic and story. So let's start with the example of Peter Jackson's trilogy, They Arrive in Bree. I remember seeing that for the first time as a kid, and I was amazed by the mud and the grit, and I'd never seen this realism within a fantasy film on the big screen. And I felt like they were trying to replicate that in some areas with The Rings of Power, but you could just feel the makeup artist rubbing the mud on the characters' faces.
That's a valid point. There are still men in Middle-earth. There are still men in these lands. And yes, it looked very unnatural as far as, costumes and makeup and the mud. I will still say that I liked the elves. The elves at this point, I think they were a little bit closer to the times of the Valar, right? To the times of their conception. They were, in a sense, pure beings. I think that was what they were trying to convey through that feeling of cosplay, right? Like of Comic-Con. Everything was in a different state of being.
No, we're not yet in the age of men, but we still have men living on a farm in the mud. So why does the mud not affect the men in a realistic manner?
As far as the costumes go, they are very polished. I did not mind it. Remember, we live in a different age, right? So like the action takes place in a different age. We're not in the age of men anymore. We're not like in Lord of the Rings where we're making the transition between the age of elves to the age of men.
But a lot of the costumes. And remember, we have House of the Dragon, so watching this side by side, I was like, why do these costumes feel real? Why do these costumes not? And it just felt like adults dressing up at Comic-Con. That's how it felt more like in that direction. And there's just something about the aesthetic of it. The armor does not feel like this was historic. There's nothing feels historical about it. Game of Thrones, it feels like you're in a museum, and this could be armor that would be in a museum. I can't think of any armor in Rings of Power that I would feel like would be in a medieval museum. And you can make the case, well, that's because this is a whole separate world that didn't exist, and so therefore it wouldn't be in a museum. But these are psychological things that you're not going to be able to get away from as a filmmaker. Let's take Galadriel, her fighting style, for example. Let's take the ice troll. In the first episode, why the elves, if we're living in the time of the elves, it seemed strange that all of the other elves seemed incompetent in combat except her. They were getting their butts kicked by this troll, and then she just pulls out karate and takes it down.
Yes, it might not be totally accurate as far as the lore goes. It might not follow Tolkien's writings to a T. I would compare it to, like the original Star Wars trilogy and then the prequels, episodes 1, 2, and 3. I guess my view is we're talking about it. We have a show that continues, or it's trying to expand on the universe of Lord of the Rings. That's a win in my book.
There's no way we could not be talking about it, given that this was created by the largest corporation, Amazon. In the IP, we're going to be talking about it. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a win, I would say. And I don't understand, and I still to this day, I've never heard anyone be able to explain to me why Galadriel, when she changed her mind, her brilliant plan was to jump off the boat in the middle of the ocean. No land in sight. That's your plan. You're just going to swim. How are you going to survive that? The character motivation needs to be understood instinctively. And that's an example we can't instinctively understand that.
Warren was talking about costumes and story. Yes, the story is stupid at a lot of points. Yes, Galadriel jumping into the water, into the ocean, I don't know what she was expecting.
I thought the orcs were well done. I think mostly because there was less CGI involved, and I always think that really delivers a punch. I think that's the big reason why the first Peter Jackson trilogy did so well, because there was so little when it came to the orcs versus The Hobbit, where the orcs were then CGI. It just takes away something massive. So they did a good job bringing that back and having people actually dressed up as orcs, and you could feel that. That was well done. I'll give them that.
I cannot remember a lot about characters, so I don't think the characters were developed enough. It's season number 1. Peter Jackson had to develop characters and did so in a trilogy. Okay, so we meet these characters. Of course, they were very powerful actors, and that's one of the big differences. You have somebody like who was it, Ian McKellen? Yes, he's going to play that character. He's going to play the hell out of that character. And he's going to develop that character because he does not have the time. There's a time constraint there. Okay, we have to make this work.
First Peter Jackson movie, 2.5 hours, let's say. In that time, we were able to get satisfaction with character development and have feel payoff and be invested. If you can do that within 2.5 hours, why can't you do that in 8 hours?
In summating it, I think it's a different generation of filmmakers, right? So like even with the music, can you really compare Howard Shore's score to Bear McCreary's? They're both of them amazing composers, right? I could right now play or sing, if I had an instrument, I could probably play you all of the themes that Howard Shore wrote. Yes, that comes from watching the movie, a bunch of times and listening to the music and so on and playing it. Could I think right now of one of the themes written by Bear McCreary in The Rings of Power? Not so much, but that's okay because the music is amazing. It's like the difference between try to hum Star Wars by John Williams and try to hum the soundtrack of The Dark Knight by Hans Zimmer. You can't, right? And you can't because it's a completely different style. We're not going for memorable themes, and it's a different era of Hollywood, okay? We can't go for the memorable themes of Indiana Jones and E.T. and Star Wars and so on, the John Williams era. We're in an era that uses synthesizer, that we use soundscapes. The music, the show, I think, is for a new generation. Did the generation like it? Apparently not. I did. And I grew up with Lord of the Rings, and I read the books first, and then I saw the movies, and I was amazed. And sitting in the theater and seeing how Peter Jackson hit every single beat in the books. I enjoyed it not because I knew nothing about it, just because I knew a lot about it. So I think going to Warren's point, I think he's right about that. I was excited to watch something new. I was excited to see the new Star Wars, the newest trilogy, The Force Awakens and The Rise of Skywalker and so on. At the end of the day, it's entertaining.